It has become fashionable in the rewriting of Nigerian history, to which so much effort has been given to describe the January 1966 coup as being racial in intent and execution. The record shows just the opposite. Major Ojukwu was a left-wing radical and a Marxist, but he was no racialist. Far from hating the North, he loved it, and the Northern soldiers he commanded. During his coup, 3 senior Northern officers were killed, Brigadier May Malari and Colonels Pam and Lagama. 2 Yoruba senior officers were killed, and 2 Igbo officers in infantry posts, Johnson Ironsi and Emeka Odumegu Ojukwu, were marked for death. The myth became fashionable to justify the July coup, which beyond doubt had no particular political philosophy but was extremely racial. All those taking part, senior officers, junior officers and soldiers, were Northern, and all the victims were Eastern, except Fajuyi, the one Yoruba. Cut off from participation in events, Emeka sat in his Enugu office and tried to put together a picture of what had happened by using radio and telephone and listening to the stories of Eastern officers and the men who had escaped from the events of the West and the North and fled for home. It became plain that the coup had been planned and led by Major Murtala Mohammed and Major Kyari, and carried out by a range of more junior officers. He soon knew that Ironsi was dead and that the coup leaders were inside Ikeja barracks. It became plain from his stream of growing information that if the coup had had any political intent, it was aimed at pulling the North out of Nigeria, for fluttering above Ikeja barracks was a new and strange flag, the flag of the Republic of Northern Nigeria. It remained there for 18 days. When he telephoned Army headquarters in Lagos to try to speak with the Army Chief of Staff, Yakubu Gowon, he found his officer had left. In fact, Gowon had already arrived at breakfast time at Ikeja barracks that morning of 29 July and was closeted with the leaders of the coup. By sundown, it was plain that seizure and killing of Eastern officers and soldiers was going on in army barracks all over the West and the North. This pattern went on for 3 days. The coup leaders locked up in Ikeja barracks with only Gowon shuttling between Ikeja and Lagos City. The flag of secession fluttering over the barracks, while the awful killing of Eastern soldiers and civilians went on inside, and more killings going on elsewhere as the army, last bastion of national unity, tore itself apart. When the secessionist aim of the coup leaders became known, a cold wind swept through many quarters, but nowhere more than through the British High Commission. Exactly how many meetings Yakubu Gowon had with the British High Commissioner in those 3 days is not known, but it is clear that there was a 6-hour meeting between them on the morning of 1st August. Emeka, from his numerous sources in and around Lagos, was able to grasp much of what was going on, including the secessionist aim of the coup. Gowon, it appeared, was shuttling between the High Commission and Ikeja, seeking to dissuade the coup leaders from pulling the North out of Nigeria. The argument he seemed to be using was, "You've got it all now, why settle for half? Stay on and rule the whole country." But whose argument was this, Emeka wondered? Gowon's or the British High Commissioners? The 6-hour meeting of 1st August seemed to have been crucial. By noon, Gowon had reported back to Ikeja. In the afternoon, Emeka spoke to Gowon there by phone. Gowon informed him that now the group intended to stay in Lagos after all and take over the running of the country. When Emeka protested, Gowon snapped back, "Well, that's what my boys want and they're going to get it." He also made it plain that he was being named or naming himself Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and head of the National Military Government. Emeka pointed out that under the Constitution, the Supreme Military Council in plenary session would have to make that appointment if Ironsi was truly dead, and Ogundipe refused to accept the legitimate succession. Gowon thought this one over and put the phone down. That night, 1st August, he made a public speech claiming the Supreme Military Council by a majority had nominated him Supreme Commander. That was not true. For one thing, the Supreme Military Council did not take majority decisions and for another it had not met. Even the later meeting of the council that confirmed Gowon in his new post was not plenary because it was held in conditions that made it impossible for Emeka to attend and get out alive. So on two grounds, legal and practical, Emeka refuted Gowon's right to supreme commandership. The legal one was as stated. The practical one concerned Gowon's authority to command in practical terms. It was clear from information coming into Emeka's office that the random and sometimes methodical killing of Eastern soldiers and officers was still going on 3 days after the coup leaders had won. He called on Gowon to put a halt to it. Absolutely nothing happened to stop the killings. They went on until the end of August, by which time 300 Eastern officers and men were dead or missing. Emeka took the view that if you call yourself Supreme Commander, you damn well have to command. If you can't, you don't get the title. In those first few days, Emeka managed to get one shot to call Murtala Mohammed and ask for the killings to stop, but the phone was taken over by Gowon. I really should have been talking to Murtala, said Emeka later, for he could actually command things. He had led the coup and he had won. If he had ordered the killings to stop, they would have stopped within an hour. But Murtala Mohammed, in an extraordinary period, had quite simply got bored with the whole affair and gone off. What seems to have happened is that he had listened to Gowon's arguments brought up from the British High Commission in Lagos and finally said in words to that effect, "Okay, Yakubu, you're so smart with all your political ideas, you take over." But the problem from Emeka's point of view was still the same. Yakubu Gowon could not get his orders followed. This inability to command became a character of his whole 9-year reign, which brought Nigeria as low as she had ever been. He claimed the personal credit for everything that went right, but maintained he could not prevent the excesses and the failures. It went on until Murtala, the man of action, finally lodged patience with him in 1975.
There was a bloodless coup today in Nigeria, which is Black Africa's biggest and richest nation and the world's 8th largest oil producer. The overthrow of strongman Major General Yakubu Gowon reportedly was engineered by the head of his personal bodyguard.
In August 1966, Emeka realized that while he could not recognize the supremacy of Gowon as successor to Ironsi, if anything of Nigeria was to be saved from the mess, he would have to try and cooperate with the new regime. To this end, he proposed that representatives of the 4 military governors meet urgently to seek at least a temporary association of the regional military power blocks now created by the coup. This was agreed and representatives met on 9th August. They made one important agreement, with the North concurring. This was that troops be returned to their regions or origin to allow matters cool down a bit. The West was particularly in favor of this and the North made no objection. Emeka, as usual, abided by an agreement to the letter. All northern troops based in the East were escorted by train to the North with their arms, which under the agreement were supposed to be returned later. They never were. Eastern troops outside the East were either let loose, unarmed to make their way home as best they could, or brought out of their cells and shot. The Midwest was without troops anyway. The West remained garrisoned by huge numbers of northern troops who never moved, which made it rather hard for the Westerners, by now effectively spoken for by the newly liberated Chief Awolowo, to speak their true mind in the months to come. But there was one other light on the horizon: the forthcoming meeting of the Ad hoc Constitutional Conference, due to meet in Lagos on 12 September. In each region, discussions at all levels were taking place to decide the posture each region would adopt. In a black outlook, the Constitutional Conference, which had been proposed during Ironsi's reign and not cancelled, gave a ray of hope. If it could devise a way of all the regions and their people living together, it could pave the way for the return of civilian rule. Civilian rule might not have been brilliant, but in 6 months, 2 army regimes had managed to do more damage than the civilian politicians in 6 years. Emeka hoped this vital conference would lay the groundwork for a new constitution and the redemocratization of Nigeria. The East was going to propose a loose association of states with wide internal autonomy, not because this was thought ideal. Almost all Easterners, including Emeka, had spent their lives as strong one Nigeria men, but because it seemed the only temporary plan that took cognizance of the deep divisions now present in the country. As it turned out, the North proposed an even looser relationship, a sort of confederation of Nigerian states. Through the summer, hopes were pinned on this event. On the evening of 11 September, all the Eastern delegates were united in Enugu, ready for a morning takeoff for Lagos. During the afternoon, reports began to come in of an outbreak of killings of Easterners in the North. The delegates, with the events of May and July/August fresh in their minds, promptly lost their nerve and refused to fly to Lagos the next day. Emeka summoned all of them to State House and spent hours trying to persuade them to attend the conference, stressing over and over again the importance of a negotiated way out of the present troubles. They refused. Finally, exhausted, Emeka retired to his private quarters and told his father, Sir Odumegu, who was back in the east, what had happened. The most influential Igbo in the country rose and quietly left the room. All that evening and night, Sir Louis went from house to house, urging, exhorting, cajoling the men to change their minds. At midnight, he returned to State House triumphant. He had persuaded them. They would fly the next morning. After a last drink with his son, Sir Odumegu drove to Nkalagu, where he was spending the night with his friends. At 3 in the morning, the phone by Emeka's bed rang. His father was seriously ill, possibly dying. He drove at once the 30 miles to Nkalagu and arrived in time to hold his father's hand and receive his blessings. Ten minutes later, Sir Odumegu was dead. At 9 a.m. on the 12th, stricken with grief, Emeka was at Enugu airport to see the delegation fly off. The reports from the north had been confirmed. Sporadic killings of the Easterners by roving mobs had started again, as in May. Before his eyes, the aircraft took off to Lagos and the conference that he hoped might yet save the old Nigeria. It was not to be.